Hello, everyone. I'm Professor Philip Dettleff from the School of Veterinary Medicine from Universidad Católica de Chile. And today we're going to talk about marine food resource. When we talk about marine food resource, uh, we're going to see different topics, and this is the online of the talk. First, we must understand what marine food resources are, which are the main uh, origins of marine food resource, including fisheries and aquaculture. Also, the main current challenge of both industries. And finally, we're going to see some of the biological effects that some of this challenge generate the biology of some of species like fish. When we talk about marine food resource, we're all talking about all the fish, invertebrates, and even plants obtained from the sea to human or animal consumption. Uh, These include in some cultures like the Japanese culture or Scandinavian cultures, some marine mammals like whales, and also some seabirds. As you can see, exists a wide diversity of marine food resource, including fish like, for example, Atlantic salmon, invertebrate like oysters, plants like seaweed, among others. But to understand the relevance of marine food resource, we must understand which are or how is the consumption uh, worldwide of the aquatic food uh, across each continent. As you can see, exists a variable level of consumption of this type of food uh, that change a lot according each continent. Clearly, the uh, uh, the main consumers are located in Asia, uh, with more than 30 to 50 kilograms of uh, aquatic food uh, per uh, capita per year. Um, that is relevant to understand how the marine food supply is uh, consumed and the demand is generated worldwide. When we talk about marine food supply, we must understand uh, which are the source of this marine resource. We found mainly two sources, the fisheries and the aquaculture industry. When we talk about fisheries, we talk about the industry that capture fish and invertebrates from the environment that include different kind of environment, different location, including marine location or inland locations, lakes, rivers, among others. Um, this industry also have a variable level of complexity from artisanal fishermen that can have only one boat and capture uh, some dozen of kilograms per day of fish. So to big companies with a float of ships that capture hundreds of tons and go for fisheries in international waters for several months. Um, the fisheries industry also is regulated and is regulated for each country in terms of the legislation of each country for their national jurisdiction of uh, their water or their coast um, regulation with uh, laws that indicate the amount or the tons of capture for each species, the level of endangerment that each species has, and how is managed each species in each country. But also exist some agreements and regulation in terms of international waters fisheries industry. Um, in terms of the relevance of fisheries worldwide, represent more than 90 millions of tons in capture worldwide, and and you can see that exist some big players in terms of the fisheries industry that represent a huge percentage of this amount. The main producer is China, followed by Indonesia, Peru, Russia, and the States. Uh, and these 10 countries represent uh, a high percentage of the total capture worldwide. In terms of the species group, the type of capture depends and vary according the location in the different oceans. And also the catch vary according the ocean and according the location inside each ocean. As you can see, for example, the Pacific, especially the Asia Pacific area, is one of the main uh, areas for fisheries, for fishing, and with the more relevant catch uh, of different kind of aquatic animals, demersal fish, and other pelagic fish. Um, in the um, American Pacific coast, the South Pacific coast is also very relevant. And for example, in the Atlantic Ocean, you can see that the South Atlantic is not so relevant like the North Atlantic area. Respect to the aquaculture industry, when we talk about aquaculture, we talk about the production of aquatic organisms. These include fish, invertebrates, and plants uh, in both coastal or inland areas. That involves the intervention of the humans in the breeding process of that species to increase the production and the manage of the productive system. It's relevant to know that this food supply industry is the world's fastest growing production sector of the food area. And in fact, according to FAO, um, is the main uh, expected sector that will be supply the demand for the uh, protein of animal origin in the next 2 decades uh, required for the increase in the world population. This sector has a variable level of technology according to the productive system, and also have several type of products with different price. In general, productive systems that have lower price product are uh, productive systems that have low technology, and uh, productive system with higher value product are in general include uh, higher highest level of technology. Here you can see how the aquaculture production changed the last 50 years. And as you can see in this graph, in the different sector of the aquaculture, including finfish, crustacean, mollusk, and even algae, all these sectors has increased the production in the last decade in a constant manner, with some increase bigger than others, but showing that this is an industry that with a constant growth in terms of the million of tons that produce. In terms of the main producers, when we talk about finfish, uh, mainly three producers generate almost the half of the total production worldwide, with China as the first, followed by Norway and Chile. And in the case of crustacean production, China also is the main producer, followed by Vietnam and India. And in the case of mollusk, we observe also that China is by far the main producer, followed by Indonesia. Also, when we observe the market in that sense, um, we observe in the first figure the top exported, with uh, some countries uh, like the main exporters, including China, India, uh, United States, and Chile between the big exporters. But uh, United States and China also are uh, one of the most uh, main importer countries. So they produce a lot and sell a lot to other countries, but also they import a lot of other kind of marine products. So this is relevant in terms of what kind of species are producing and selling to other countries, and what kind of products are buying from another countries. In terms of the current challenge, the fisheries have several challenges, more than which I show you here, but these are one of the biggest challenge now. One of the main challenge is the overfishing. Um, Also, the pollution of some areas is very relevant. The constant pollution for one side, but also the pollution generated by accidents that can affect temporarily the capacity to make captures in some locations. Also, the climate change is one of the main challenge for fisheries. Um, the protected areas is a relevant issue. For one side, uh, reduce the location where you can make fisheries, but for other side, provide a location where the fish and in general wild population on oceans can grow and maintain and reproduce, and that also generate benefits to increase the population, the commercial population. And also some conflict in terms of national jurisdiction between different countries, and also conflict between uh, some uh, ships that pass or trespass from international waters to national jurisdiction waters. In this graph, you can see how the status of the species or features has changed in the last 50 years, and you clearly can see that several features species are no more uh, sustainable, has increased in a big way uh, this problem. And also you can see that we have a relevant percentage of sustainable features, but that are in the maximum capacity of that species. So uh, really worldwide, this industry uh, cannot grow too much in that sense without affect or without generate overfish of that species. So it's very delicate in that sense. In the terms of aquaculture, we have several challenges. Also, the demand, the increasing demand for marine food resource, but also more um, a more relevant and a specific demand for the consumer. No, it's not only a demand in terms of increase the amount of marine food resource, also is a demand that require uh, some specific characteristic of the food. Uh, More clean food, more sustainable, more uh, welfare certifications, non-antibiotic use, among others, requirements that some markets are now including. Also, a main challenge is the increase in the fish food cost. Uh, the many of the ingredients for generate the fish food compete or are the same that we use in human nutritions or in terrestrial animal nutritions, and that made that we have to look how generate new enzymes for uh, fish or marine species nutritions, and that is a main challenge also. Of course, for agriculture, also the climate change is a main issue. The disease outbreaks are a main issue of the main uh, productive system, marine system with open, especially with open system like sea cage uh, that are normally affected by different kind of virus, bacteria, or parasites. Um, Associated with climate change, also uh, we have in the last decade, especially an increase in algal blooms that affect the the fish. Um, Also, a relevant issue is the antibiotic use in aquaculture, how we use antibiotics in a sustainable way without affect the environment and without generating uh, antima- um, antibiotic resistance. Um, Also, a challenge for the industry is the change in the regulations and also how is changing the use of the codes for for this industry. Here you can see the some biophysical change that are generated by global warming and how can affect this industry. For example, changing ocean currents, sea level rise, rainfall, changing river flow or lake levels, thermal structures, storm severity and frequency, acidification of the ocean that can have an effect in the ecology and biodiversity of populations, in the fishing, aquaculture, and post-harvest operations, in the communities, and in the economy, and affect at different levels the marine food supply sector. Also, the climate change can affect the food security, including the availability, where some species associated to climate change uh, will increase the availability of the resource, and other species will decrease the availability. Also, the stability of many productive systems will change due to the climate change. The access to aquatic food will be affected by uh, uh, change in the livelihood of the fisheries and aquaculture productive system and the population that are part of that system, and the use of aquatic products also will be changing associated to that. In terms of the expected big effect in the oceans associated with fisheries due to climate change, it's expected that the fish biomass decrease in tropical areas, and in the case of temperate areas and high latitude area, it's expected that the fish biomass increase. Um, and in the upwelling areas, it's not so clear the effect that could be observed. In the case of aquaculture, it's expected that more intense tropical extreme cyclones are observed that can affect the infrastructure and the individuals. It's expected also that the change in water temperatures generate jointly with the increase in nutrients, generate an increase of algal blooms that affect uh, the the fish um, in a relevant way. Now, uh, specifically in terms of the effect of climate change associated to changing temperature, uh, the fish in general are poikilotherms. That means that the body temperatures change according the environment temperatures. And each species has a range inside that species uh, maintained in a good way. But when the temperature uh, decrease or increase outside of that range, that could generate an stress in the individual, generating a response, a stress response with an increase of cortisol and catecholamines, an increase for energy supply, um, and finally a heat shock response that could uh, generate a an affection of growth, reproduction, and immune response, and also can generate oxidative damage in several tissues. As you can see in the second figure, this oxidative damage generated for reactive oxygen species associated to that stress could lead to DNA oxidation, protein carbonylation, and lipid oxidation. Uh, in some studies that we performed, we have observed, for example, in some fish species that temperature could affect uh, uh, juvenile individuals, generating oxidative damage, and also inducing atrophy in muscle. This is a relevant issue because muscle is is the final product that is developed, and if you have atrophy of the muscle, you don't have growth, and you don't have a good product or an efficient productive system. Also, in the early stage, like for example larva or eggs, uh, we observe that, and has been observed in several species, that uh, change in temperature could affect the species, generated oxidative damage, and affecting the quality of the eggs. And this could generate several problems because could affect the quality of the individuals. That is very relevant for a good productive system in the aquaculture industry. Um, when you have an increase in temperature, uh, normally, as you can see in the figure, this generate an increase in the metabolic rate, and the fish increase the food consumption to have the energy uh, to face this increase in the metabolic rate. But when the temperature increase too much, uh, this increase in food cannot supply this delta in the increase in the metabolic rate. And finally, what happens is that the fish cannot maintain normal um, all the normal process, and some process like development, reproduction, uh, are uh, not receiving the energy required, or growth, for example. And also, it's very important in the reproduction and development area, like you can see in the second figure, where development and fertilization is affected, associated to stressors and temperature. In other metabolic process and tissues, also can be affected for this kind of stress associated to climate change, for example, like in liver. You can see here in the figure that uh, temperature associated to heat waves can have an effect in the protein processing in liver, at transcriptional level, or in the case, for example, of gills, uh, several processes can be affected, including the protein folding and the immune response capacity of the fish, affecting several uh, processes associated with this kind of factors uh, related with climate change. Other factor related with climate change that also affect the biology of the fish is, for example, the acidification of the ocean. As you can see in this map, it's expected that associated to climate change, um, the acidification of the ocean will increase, especially in some particular areas that can have a direct effect in the species, the marine species. Also, it's expected that exists a problem in the nutrients distribution associated to this, uh, that could generate an increase in nutrients or a decline in oxygen, uh, that could generate uh, zones without oxygen, that basically means in hypoxic area where natural population or aquaculture population cannot live. Also, it's very relevant the protected areas. In this map, you can see in the first map the percentage of protected areas according their coast for each country. We can see that some countries have more than 10% of of their coast protected, while other countries have very low uh, percentage of their coast protected. And in the second graph, you can see all the protected areas around the world. Also, another relevant challenge is the new technology incorporation, like genetically modified organisms. Here we have the first approved species for human consumption, that is the Atlantic salmon of the Aquabonti company. That is a transgenic fish for the growth hormone that was approved after 10 years, more than 30 years for the FDA for human consumption, but that has very strict regulation and law and have to be produced in land and with sterile animals and a several requirement to be produced. And also with the new technology like CRISPR, um, we have several species in terms of research that we already have the technology. We made um, genetically modified organisms with CRISPR, but that we have to see what will be happening with this kind of modification in terms of legislation across all the countries and the aquaculture species. Today, the previous case of Aquabonti is the only case of an approved product of GMO. Also, another relevant thing is the outbreaks. Many disease will increasing their outbreaks frequency related with climate change, and some of them are very relevant, like the white spot in shrimps or District salmoni in the Chilean salmon industry. And also, this is directly related with the use of antibiotics and the antibiotic resistant generation due to the use of this kind of product. And these are relevant issues. And finally, also, a relevant challenge is how we can, without use a big amount of antibiotics, how we can manage these uh, disease problems in agriculture. And some novel and relevant um, solutions include the disease, the genetic selection for disease resistance associated with genetic markers and the selection of genetically resistant families, for example, like in Isovirus, or this identify new markers that in some case are more difficult to find when you have more polygenic traits, like in the case of the bacteria Bisturicata salmonis in salmon. And in other case, you have very successful case, like for example, the IPN virus case that solve the problem of that virus almost in 90% of the case. So this is very relevant to solve this current challenge and maintain a sustainable marine food supply. I think that that is my final message. I think that all this current challenge and all the future solution in marine food supply have to go uh, in terms of how make a more sustainable industry in both terms, in terms of fisheries and also in terms of aquaculture industry. Well, thank you very much, and I hope that you learn some new topics in this session. Thanks and bye.